If you can position yourself with the right name, the right one-liner, the right reputation, so that people know you would add strategic value, well, then people want to show you deals first exclusively at a better valuation, then you've won the deal flow game.
What if I told you the man who interviews billionaires for a living isn't one himself?
Don't listen to people, listen to yourself and the few people that are down the path you want to go down, and ignore every single other voice, because a lot of people are not fast moving, they're lazy, they won't work hard, they won't focus. They're telling you their worldview, which has limited them, not what is the optimal mental model to operate on.
Richard C. Wilson has done something most people in private equity, venture capital, and high finance only dream about. He didn't just build the world's largest family office network from scratch. He earned the trust of the ultra-wealthy by helping them protect, grow, and multiply their fortunes. He's hosted over 300 investor events, published 13 books, built an audience of over 17 million people, and personally interviewed 45 billionaires to decode how they actually think and make decisions. He owns familyoffices.com, the #1 destination for deal makers managing generational wealth.
10 years ago, nobody knew what a family office is. Now, a recent stat came out last week saying that family offices manage more capital than all of private equity and venture capital combined. I just realized that family offices are basically just winners in the game of business. They're just smart founders, typically, that have scaled up. For any investor listening to this, or anyone running like a PE platform or real estate platform, I think one of the most powerful things you can do is that.
Welcome back to the Deal Flow Show podcast. Today, we have the very first family office guest, the owner of familyoffices.com and the Family Office Club, Richard C. Wilson. Welcome.
Thanks for having me here. Appreciate you guys.
Yeah, for everybody who doesn't know you, which I'm sure a lot of people that will listen do know you and have heard of you, can you explain to them what it is that you do with familyoffices.com? Who it is that you help? And
Sure. We're basically a investor club. I started it in 2007. Since then I've hosted 300 events and put out 13 books. We've interviewed, dozens and dozens of billionaires and almost 100 pro athletes on stage. And so we're just a community that hosts 16 events in person per year and offers investors and those looking to connect with investors a community, basically.
I know for me, in my experience, there's been that one guy who's introduced the mythical family office niche, if you will. They kind of put me onto it and are like, these are family offices. This is exactly how that works. How did you come across family offices as a whole? Did you grow up around them? Did you have a mentor that introduced you to what they were? How did you get into the family office space?
Sure. Well, my first job paid me too much money for how old I was. I was like 21 years old and making over 100,000 a year. And I was like, who else is going to pay me a lot of money at this age? Like almost nobody, unless I go work in commercial real estate or raising capital. And then it's kind of eat what you kill, right? So it doesn't matter your age. So I got a job raising capital, had no idea what I was doing, started cold calling every institutional investor that didn't want to talk to me because the hedge fund I represented was smaller. Then I started cold calling every wealth management firm, trying to get them investors through there. And I found that most of them said, no, we can't work with you. You have to be on a platform, or no, not all of our investors are even accredited. So we couldn't even invest in your hedge fund if we wanted to. So you're wasting your time. And then one person answered the phone and said, well, we're a family office. So all of our clients are way more than accredited. They're all ultra wealthy. They're all 10 million plus. And then a light bulb went off. Like I should stop wasting my time and only focus on the ultra wealthy. And that just tuned me on to the industry existing. And then as I tried to find a trail guide back in 2006, 2007, there were none. I was just journalists talking about the space. And so then I just started sharing everything I was learning and everything kind of took off from there.
That's pretty cool. For what problems do you specifically solve for family offices? When you start working with them, what problems do you go about solving?
Sure. Usually we're helping them either set up or formalize their family office, or most often looking at their direct investment strategy, helping them focus it more. But also we have 17 million social media group members and followers across mostly LinkedIn, about 90% on LinkedIn. And between that and all of the 16 events we host per year, we just see a ton of deal flow. So if an investor wants help sourcing a co-GP or joint venture deal, if they want access to a certain type of opportunity or help with how to conduct due diligence on things better, we help those families connect with each other, but also connect with opportunities. So we're most often helping the family offices with strategy, setting up their family office or deal flow, essentially, which is, the whole point of your podcast, of course.
Definitely. I think to frame the rest of this conversation, could you break down for our audience, like a fifth grader, like what is a family office? How is it structured? Yeah, just in general, what are the fundamentals and how does it work?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of different types of family offices out there. The three main types would be a virtual family office, which is super lean and it's operated typically just for one family, outsourced just about everything. Then there's single family offices, which are a bit more formalized, maybe more in-person professionals or full-time professionals, typically one for every 50 to $70 million being managed. And then there's a multifamily office, which is like a wealth advisor, but completely different because it's focused on the ultra wealthy needs, which are very different from somebody worth 50,000 or 500,000. So those are kind of the different types. But the whole goal is just to respect the fact that if you are worth $50,000, which we all were at one point, unless we inherited money, then the thing is, the worst mistakes you could make on filing taxes late or missing a letter in the mail, the penalties will be relatively small dollar-wise, right? And you don't have to worry about losses due to a bad allocation very much. It still might be painful to lose $1,000, but the dollar amounts aren't huge. If you're worth 50 million instead of 50,000, you typically have dozens of K1s coming in, dozens, if not 100 plus LLCs. You have dozens, if not hundreds of employees. And you have letters coming in the mail every single day from some county or some regulator about something that you owe some fee or permit fee or update on or whatever, right? So the complexity is massive. And the cost of a single mistake would have paid for a full-time employee just to stare at your mail and not miss the letter or respond to annoying things and fill out regulatory paperwork and do all this nonsense that comes with being very successful. So at the very core, it's about freeing up the entrepreneur who created the wealth to create more wealth or actually enjoy the wealth versus deal with all the nonsense and keep everything organized and kind of on track and more holistic.
That was a great breakdown. So it's not actually the family. It's kind of a separate organization that's serving the family that's created the wealth to allow them to create more wealth. It just at a very basic level. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, it can be. The thing is, sometimes a family office wants to only employ their own family members for a lot of the work. Other times, they want to outsource everything and not use any family members, and there's too much infighting in the family to rely upon the family members. It just depends on the family. But a lot of times, the father and the daughter, or the father and the son, or the mother and the son, etc., whatever the combination of genders is, are the ones who created the wealth and are overseeing everything. And then they'll hire some outsourced talent, whether it's a part-time chief investment officer, part-time, head of direct investments or CFO, etc. And a lot of it is, what are our values? Where are we going and why? Do we value income? Do we want to take on big risks? Do we want very little risk? And as you get to third and fourth generation families, they're basically just trying to not lose the money and disperse it to people, typically. It's the creation of new wealth that typically only happens in the first and early second generation. Otherwise, it usually just gets dissipated over time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How did you, from like stepping into this space, did you have a sort of, did you have any, I guess people would call it imposter syndrome and starting to deal with ultra high net worth individuals while not being a a net worth individual or high net worth individual yet? Like, how did you have any sort of insecurities in dealing with these types of clientele?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when I started, I had less money in my bank account than I had due for rent in my basement apartment in Harvard Square. I was in a little studio apartment with like one little prison-like window out to the world. And, I was basically broke when I started it. And so coming from that, I just realized that family offices are basically just winners in the game of business. And they're just smart founders typically that have scaled up. And so I just learned from them to build my own business. And I think that is what people miss about Family Office Club is that you're learning from these founders that are like super entrepreneurs. So it doesn't matter if you're raising capital right now. It doesn't matter if you're doing $500,000 in revenue or 5 million or 50 million. there's things to learn from these people, whether or not you're trying to raise capital this minute. And at the end of the day, people end up investing with those they trust and know. So if you wait until you need to raise capital to try to meet with family offices, like you're going to have to plant a lot of seeds and be patient, because it's not like they're going to meet you in the next day, wire over $5 million, right? Like the trust matters more than the numbers that you promise on a piece of paper in your pitch deck, right? So that's kind of the missing thing. People come to us being like, yeah, I need to raise this money. I need to raise capital. Say, okay, great. Definitely can. You could land a $50 million allocation from, a big family office potentially, or 5 or 10 or 30 million. But the insights and the mental models and the strategies that you get are really the most powerful thing. And then the money kind of comes as a byproduct of the relationships.
What you just said resonates with me a ton, because I remember when I first picked up a camera and started doing content for entrepreneurs. I worked for a guy in Chicago, and I would spend 12 hours with him at his 4-story mansion and his office with all these employees and everything. I'd go back home to, like what you said, this beat down, run down apartment in the hood in West Side Chicago. And it was just this crazy dynamic. What yeah, I remember going home every night being like, what the heck? Like just consistently having to go back and forth. Did you experience a bit of that when
Oh yeah. I think it's healthy though, right? Like I grew up, trying to start businesses, having them fail. I grew up reading Inc. magazine. I grew up stuffing mailboxes with my flyers to mow their lawn, to the point where the local government called, and luckily I answered the phone, and it was like somebody had complained to the government that some 17-year-old was stuffing their mailbox with landscaping flyers. Like I guess it annoyed somebody, but like my point is that it's good. You can look at it and be like, oh my God, what have I done with my life? I'm such a failure. But you can look at it in a very positive way. And there's like this cognitive dissonance between where they are and where you are. And then you want to close that gap a bit, and you see what's possible. And so many times you come to a family office club community event, and you hear from 75 or 125 speakers on stage over 2 or 3 days. And it's just like a fire hose of like optimism and opportunities and deal structures and stories. And it's just kind of like, completely different than what you read in the mainstream media.
Yeah, for sure. That's that. Yeah, I was gonna say, like, you mentioned the cognitive dissonance is so. Like, I just relate to that a ton. I wanted to ask you, what in those days, what was your not what you thought your driver was as to why you wanted to become rich, but when looking back on it, why do you think you wanted to be rich and be like these guys so bad? 'Cause some guys will look at ultra high net worth individuals and unfortunately not feel a great way about them.
Yeah, I mean, luckily I grew up in a healthy household. My parents are still married. They've been married for like 40 years. I would get along with my brothers and sisters. Like, we did sports growing up. I'm a third generation Eagle Scout. So I think I had, pretty good values, and got fortunate in the environment I grew up in. And I was always wanting to start businesses after seeing my dad run his business and reading Inc. magazine. So I was motivated to be an entrepreneur. I was very impatient. And like a lot of times people get prescribed drugs when they have ADD, quote unquote. But maybe the ADD is just an impatience for a broken, outdated teaching system that just bores people to death memorizing junk, right? Maybe it's the teacher that should get the bad grade for boring people. And it's kind of like, yeah, sitting there and just listening to this garbage is not fun. And like my teachers told me, don't graduate a year early from college. And then I did. And I was making more money than them 3 months after I graduated than they were making, telling me not to graduate early. Like, don't listen to people in life. Like, listen to yourself and the few people that are down the path you want to go down, and ignore every single other voice, because a lot of people are not fast moving. They're lazy. They won't work hard. They won't focus. And they're telling you their worldview, which has limited them, not what is the optimal mental model to operate on.
I love that. You've mentioned multiple times like the mental models, and like having these conversations, like the whole point of the show for us has kind of also been to learn. And we've had a lot of conversations with different people in private equity and entrepreneurs and people that are really successful. And I've had like multiple paradigm shifts in just the last couple of weeks. What are some, you've been doing this, you said for how many years, 20 plus years or 18 years? 18 years. What are some of those paradigm shifts from that original guy who was sitting there with less money in his account than he had to pay rent, to today after being in this game 18 years and meeting with tons of billionaires and being around hyper successful people.
Yeah, I mean, one was when I was raising capital and then my blog took off and started getting a couple thousand hits a day. I got on the front page of the Boston Globe when I was like 26 years old because I was quoted about a story. And my boss said, you have to delete this blog or go find another job. And so I was like, well, I'll go find another job then. And I got a job offer at another capital raising firm. And every single person in my life, including my entrepreneurial father, told me I should take that job. The mentor would be amazing. He's a very high integrity person who had raised $1 billion plus. I'd be learning from one of the best in the industry, and he would allow me to keep the blog, right? But one person, I remember walking through the computer lab in Harvard Square, the exact moment he told me this, and it struck so true that I literally sat down in a chair and I was like, holy crap, he's right. And he said, like, Richard, I have 5 kids and a house and a wife. I have all this overhead to worry about every month. I have to worry about college coming up in 7 years. Like, you're a single guy with no family, no mortgage. Like, what do you have to lose? Like, start your own business. If it sucks and it fails and 18 months later, go back and you can grovel for that job and someone's going to hire you, right? Like, what do you have to risk really here? And that was a changing point in my life, just kind of taking that leap of faith. And then I remember launching one of our products. I didn't have an office when I first started the business. I was in Boston working out of a Boloco burrito shop, basically, because I had a home office desk. But it wasn't very enjoyable to be cooped up in my own little apartment in Cleveland Circle there all the time at that time. And so I'd go to the local Boloco burrito shop. And I remember the day that we launched one of our products, I refreshed my PayPal and it said 7,000. I refreshed it again. It said 22,000. I refreshed it again. It said $35,000. And bringing in $35,000 in a single day when before, people are offering me 50, 60,000 a year plus some upside performance. It was kind of like in the Pursuit of Happiness where he walks outside, and he kind of realizes that like he made it or he has something there or like, oh, this is real. That was kind of a life-changing moment just to like gain confidence of like, hey, we are doing something. So, Peter Thiel says that you can get the closest to predicting the future when you're very highly confident in something that other people don't see yet, or they question and they're wishy-washy on. But I always thought like, well, when are people not going to want to access the wealthiest people on planet Earth? So hell yeah, I'm going to buy familyoffices.com. Why isn't everyone else fighting over this turf? Right. It's like, so trying to find that conviction that other people don't see is, I think, part of the key for me.
I love that. You mentioned that first business. Did you launch it off the back of your blog? You had all this traffic and you launched an internet company. Can you talk to me a bit about that first business?
Yeah, basically, I was just selfishly trying to teach myself. So I just read a bunch on family offices, have a couple calls with them, and then write up an article on it. And I do that once or twice a week. And we started getting 50 hits a day. A random person would email me, and I'd get excited about that. Then I would say, okay, well, why am I getting this traffic? And I did research, and I found SEO Moz and Pro Blogger back in the day, and basically read Perry Marshall's book on SEO and pay-per-click, and I was like, oh, okay, well, there's keywords, I guess. People find me on Google. How do I get more traffic? And I found there's 500 keywords related to family offices, capital raising, and hedge funds. And out of those 500 keywords, I made an Excel spreadsheet, and I wrote 2 blog posts on every single keyword and systematically went through and started writing, a post a day, 2 posts a day. Then we got to 1,000 hits a day in traffic. So I started writing 4 posts a day. And then we got 7,000 hits a day in traffic. And I just listened to what people were asking me for once we had that traffic. And then the business kind of grew organically from that. But importantly, it took focus, hard work, listening, picking up that technical, SEO skill, which was not hard to pick up. Just takes a little bit of, research to figure out how that all works.
That's really cool. I personally come from like an internet marketing background. So we do like paid ads on Facebook, Google, and also Meta, Facebook and YouTube, like the whole main channels. And it's like so interesting to hear other internet entrepreneurs who have kind of migrated into this space. Obviously you started with the blog around family offices, so maybe that's the reason why, but I think I found a lot of kind of internet entrepreneurs, they kind of stay small-minded in that direct response world. Can you talk to me about kind of that transition from, the original business to kind of where it's evolved today?
Most people don't bring this up on investment podcasts, but I'm essentially just a marketing nerd who focused for 18 years on the family office niche. That's all I am. And like, because of that, now I've got a big network and I know how family offices work, et cetera. But, one of my early mentors was Eben Pagan. I'm still friends with him today. I used to go to his Guru Mastermind events, like the Sheraton LAX, et cetera. But I'm also friends with, Joe Polish and Dean Jackson. I've studied under Dan Sullivan pretty closely. And then, Jay Abraham and Gary Halbert, John Carlton, Dan Kennedy. These are names you couldn't rattle off unless you were a marketing nerd, right? Like, so there's no way to fake that, right? And that's what's made our business is like, I think there are more experienced people in the family office world than I am. Some people that know more or potentially even know more family offices. There's not a lot that know more family offices, but for sure there are. But I do think I'm the best with putting out thought leadership and positioning in the family office space because of that background. And so the biggest mentor to me was Eben Pagan. And I remember going outside one of his conferences and I went and did a hot seat on stage with him at one of our events. And basically I asked him, like, if you were to guide me to build my business right after starting it to 7 figures in revenue, what would you suggest? And he said, go read Mastering the Rockefeller Habits by Vern Harnish. And I read that book and the chapter on choke points really stood out to me. And so a lot of our business is built off of Robert Cialdini influence and persuasion strategies, but also identifying strategic choke points, acquiring them, and then that gives us momentum to acquire the next choke point.
That's that's so cool. Yeah, because for me, I'm more of my version of SEO is YouTube titles and also because I do. For me, I got a internet content background, so that's what's so interesting is you're probably the furthest ahead when it comes to this specific choke point of notoriety. I guess the leverage that the internet provides. Why do you think that the financial world is so behind and so slow to adopt it? Because I'll we'll have conversations with the guys in private equity and an Instagram clip. I'll show them. It'll get 1,000 views, and they'll be like, "Oh my goodness, you just walked on water. This is amazing." Versus that's that's not that great in other industries. Why do you think they're slower to adopt? And what else? Yeah, why do you think that is?
Yeah, one reason is that they're just really bad marketers. Like they choose brand names like some Greek god capital or XYZ capital, and they try to confuse everyone with every breath they take. They want to be really opaque about what they do. It's like, I don't know if Wilson Capital is investing in like outhouses in Mongolia or doing biotech in Silicon Valley. Like, why did you choose that super dumb name? And I'll tell them that, and they still won't change it. They're like, oh no, I spent $20 on my business cards and $8 on GoDaddy, so I'm stuck with it, And so we help people. We've created 30 artificial intelligence tools we call investor superintelligence. And one of those tools takes a 44-page pitch deck and in 10 seconds will write out 7 one-liners that summarize 3 critical data numbers that are, credibility building, summarize what's unique about their offering and give them 7 options. And you can say, I like option 2 and 7. And then it gives you 7 more options. And you say, well, now make sure and mention this and not this. And it gives them 7 more options until their one-liner is super dialed in. And that's just one of the 30 tools we built out because people in finance are such bad marketers. They don't know the very basics, and I'll try to teach it to them, and they'll only sort of get it. So by having the AI tool, they just upload their pitch deck, and it gets it for them, and it just spits out the result versus trying to train them. It's like in some parts of Africa where instead of having basic internet infrastructure, they went straight to mobile internet, and they like skipped the middle section, right? Like US, if we come to manufacturing in the US again, hardcore, it'll probably be advanced robotic manufacturing, not like kind of sort of outdated manufacturing type approaches. So I think that's part of it. They just don't study it. They don't value it enough. And then they come to trying to raise capital or get access to deal flow. And then they wonder why they don't have more traction, but they ignore this whole field.
Right. I'll tell you a funny story because kind of how I actually got introduced to the world of private equity and buying businesses and family offices and all this stuff was through a client I had that I was running paid ads for and doing marketing for. He's got a big personal brand. We actually just interviewed him on the show. His name's Ben Kelly. And he was like, we were asking him kind of a similar question. We're like, hey, dude, you have the personal brand. Like what advantages does that give you in this world that these people don't value it? And he's like, dude, I put an Instagram story and I have 5 businesses that want to sell or I want to raise capital. I email my email list or I do this. And I'm like, these guys, I don't think they quite understand the magnitude of like what, paid media and even organic and, SEO and all these things can do for the current model that they're operating in. Are you like, do you see that often? And are you guys like, it sounds like you've built AI tools and you guys are building solutions for that, like with the family offices that you're involved in. Like, is that kind of a big focus that a big value add that you guys bring to the table?
Yeah, we definitely see that often. I think one of the problems is that, 10 years ago, nobody knew what a family office is. Now, a recent stat came out last week saying that family offices manage more capital than all of private equity and venture capital combined. And so now the space is getting known better, but people don't know when they have bad deal flow. That's one of the problems, right? And
Mm.
if you're raising capital, people always say, "Oh, deal flow is not my problem. It's investors. If I had more investors, I could get $1 billion done a week." It's like, yeah, anyone who has access to LoopNet has more deal flow than capital. That means absolutely nothing, right? Like, so it's and they think their deal is pretty good, but are they seeing the amount of deal flow an investor sees? A well-known, well-positioned investor gets literally, I get 1,080 emails per day, and that doesn't count social media reach outs. And so when people think they have good deal flow because they've seen 30 deals over 2 or 3 years, it's very different than if they see 30 deals, by lunchtime or by, in a week or a day. And so a lot of times on the investor side, people think they have decent deal flow, but how do you invest in the top 0.1% if you only look at 100 deals? You just have to get lucky, I guess. And on the capital raising side, the deals aren't as good as the capital raisers think they are. Because if your deal is mind blowing, then investors will chase you and they'll eat it up and they will want in on your deal because it is night and day better than every other thing that's in front of them in their inbox. And so you need to have this big fat funnel, which gets quality flow in by being very clear about what you do. Like, hey, we don't invest in real estate. We don't invest in real estate in New York. We are Harlem Real Estate Holdings or whatever it is, right? So you get exactly what you want, but also have a big fat funnel to get a whole bunch of attention on that focus that you have.
That's so valuable. I'm curious. So you mentioned you get thousands of deals through social media and different channels. What are some of the main channels that you get deal flow from? And then obviously it seems like you are involved with a broad spectrum of different family offices with, I'm assuming, many different investment focuses. What's your kind of filtration process of those deals and what does that look like? What are your main channels?
Yeah. So we're most active on LinkedIn. Our Investor Club Edge newsletter is free on LinkedIn. We've got like 55,000 people on that. We just launched that maybe 18 months ago now. And then we have the largest LinkedIn groups in finance and investments and family offices. So one of our groups on LinkedIn is 1.8 million people in it. And we own dozens and dozens of groups, and many of them have 1 million plus members. And so we get a lot of deal flow through there. I would say all else equal, YouTube gets us the best quality reach outs from deal flow as well as investors. And we'll have someone who literally will go and watch like 50 of our videos and then reach out and they totally trust us and we've already added value to them. So the dynamic nature of YouTube versus only a podcast seems to be, pretty great. So we're always looking at those two things. And then the filtration process is really me keeping some of our top investors in mind. Like yesterday, I had a phone call with a billionaire who came to our investor club mastermind just last week. And he said, "Hey, I love the content. I like your story." And his exact words were that he went to other family office events and the founders just didn't seem genuine. It seemed like they're just there to sell things. It was just kind of like this, cubicle jockey ran thing versus a founder who's like really dedicated to making it as great as they can. And that stood out to him. And so he opened up and said, "This is what I'm looking to invest in, et cetera." And so if we can be keeping him in mind along with my own personal interests, like we look to invest in and acquire other smaller investor clubs that might not have monetized themselves yet, or podcasts that we could shine a light on the podcast. And then we joint venture and own 20 or 50% of the podcast and help grow their podcast with our media platform. And then we get even more deal flow and their podcast grows. Like those are assets where I'm trying to go from 17 million on social media to 100 million to build a moat around our investor club. And so I look to invest for those reasons, but I'll keep my centimillionaire, billionaire clients in mind for their top mandates and things I know that they would love to see from me based on past deals that we've done together.
Yeah, with the media stuff in mind, it's so interesting that now that is the moat. It's not you've almost surpassed the moat was, you know, your ability to get in the right rooms and shake hands, and you're just brute forcing your way by sheer volume. Just
Yeah, it's funny you use that term because at our event last week, I shared 105 slides, but I shared one slide for one of my last 5 slides. And it was a blue themed slide. And at the very top, it says brute force reciprocation. And I basically had to explain to people, like, hey, a brute force attack is they're trying 1,000 combos to try to guess a password. It might take down the server. And if they get it right, then good things for the hacker happens and bad things for you. And reciprocation is influence and persuasion strategy of helping people first. So what I find is that if you can aggressively be the most helpful in a space, or as Evan Pagan taught me, to move the free line forward more than other people in your niche, and you're trying all different ways to add value first, like here's an infographic, here's an AI tool, here's the 7 investor personas that our AI tool told us this morning exist out of the 1,500 investor talks we transcribed from our conferences, is the email blast I sent out this morning. And if you're able to add value in all different ways, then you keep the ways that work, and then you keep on kind of brute forcing more ways to add value in the niche. So over time, you have like mini legs to the table. So if one stops working and goes down, you have these other legs to the table. But it definitely is like a brute force, like a helpful brute force attempt, like attitude to add value, basically, right? It's like a positive way of using brute force instead of negative.
yeah, and it is insane because you're a theory I had, right, of leveraging being able to leverage YouTube and all this other stuff because that is my skill set and that is what I do, is actually playing out in reality with what you're doing, and it's so cool to see it. How do you get I guess, what's the first reaction to these family offices who are so, isolated? And when I say isolated, they're not really on social media, and, at most, they might have a LinkedIn, if that. What is their reaction when you open up or when you show them the opportunity that they could be having? What
Weird thing is that a lot of them, even though they are a family office, this is what struck me when I was just 26, 27 years old, is that back then, even more so, but a lot of them, even though they are a family office, they were asking me what they should pay their CEO or CIO. And I'm like, okay, well, you know your own industry, I would think. But they said, well, we don't talk to our peers too much. You know, they've got 2 to 4 friends that would share such private details, but they don't know 100 family offices. They know 5 or 10 really well, and they've talked casually with 10 or 20 others at conferences, right? So the fact that we've spoken with hundreds and thousands of them over time is a unique thing. Like the billionaire yesterday, the way he put it, he said like, hey, I know that I'm the one here running the family office, but the reality is we want to get the word out to improve our deal flow. We want to talk with other family offices. We want access to our peers, and we don't have that right now. So how could we collaborate or work together? So a lot of them have that awareness that, you know, they're wondering what everyone else is doing right now in this economy at these interest rates. And one cool thing we put together recently is we took 1,000 deal structures that have been set on stage at our conferences, or our known deal structures or deal structure case studies. And then we put them in an AI tool so that a family office or our members can say, this is what I'm trying to solve for. Here's the deal I'm negotiating. Here's what the counterparty's like and their preferences. This is the risk of the deal not closing and why it would maybe not close. And then it will tell you 10 deal structures that may work for that exact situation, drawing upon the 1,000 deal structure library. And then you can say, well, I like number 2 and 6. The rest look pretty bad, but can you show me 10 more that look like 2 and 6? And then you can dial one in, and then it will write the email for you to pitch the attorney and the counterparty on why they should go with your deal terms. And the reason I bring that up is that, like, at the end of the day, the family offices are looking to tap into the greater knowledge of the community and what are the best practices. They might not want to do everything like everyone else, but they'd at least like to know, like, what is the herd doing? What are the most experienced family offices doing? And they're missing that. And so, you know, before we were giving them that by writing books and putting out YouTube videos and hosting events. And then now the AI tools just allow us to do it in a more functional, kind of done for you way. But it's the same reason that people want it.
I tend to get a lot of the it's like they're their advantage is also their weakness, as in the fact that they're, I don't like using the word sheltered, but removed from a lot of the drama that, I guess, m the business world and all this other stuff, all the drama, all the stuff you hear in the news are kind of removed from it, but also in being fully removed, they don't have access to, or they aren't aware of the stuff that could help them move the absolute fastest. And that kind of transitions into a question I wanted to ask you was you talked on another podcast about being how you can add value to family offices and how you can be a useful resource. And you mentioned kind of being the Excedrin of for them. Can you go into further detail of how else you're going about doing that on top of the AI stuff is a bit newer, but how else are you providing value to someone that for someone that maybe doesn't know AI as much as you do?
The AI stuff we can put to the side so we don't focus too much on that, so it doesn't become a distraction. But we do have, we've found these 30 different case use studies to simplify and make it super practical. Here's how to use AI if you're an investor or capital raiser, right? So like that's one way, but there's hundreds of other ways. And part of it is unique to your DNA, what your expertise is and what you can help families with. If you're trying to grow investor relationships, then figuring out what's in your toolkit. I've once cold emailed a centimillionaire and his twin brother, and cold emailed them both in the same day and got them both to reply the exact same day by saying, hey, I see you have 12 locations in your business. You're probably raising capital to open each one. I have a deal structure that allow you to bring capital in, open up new locations, and give away 0% equity using this custom structure I've developed over time running our investor club. You want to chat since I'm local and I can tell you what it is? And then they both email me back right away. So sometimes it can be an infographic. Sometimes it can be a checklist. Sometimes it could be a book, a white paper, a video, an article, a due diligence checklist. If you're in the self-storage space or senior living or stem cells, whatever it is, you could say, here are 20 things you should ask before investing in any healthcare company. And then you put that together for them. It's just helpful to them. So like when you help somebody first, you've de-risked the trust relationship transaction. And now, you've made it so that people are wanting to do business with you because you've created a sense of reciprocation. They've already benefited. They've already profited from listening to you and not wasted a moment of their life. So then they lean forward because most people email and they're just pitching something, but nobody has any responsibility to reply to your random email. So you have to be the most valuable email in their entire inbox that day, or you're probably just not going to get a reply at all these days.
So interesting. I think you have such a cool perspective because you've synthesized like a lot of the value you provide. It sounds like is you're talking to all the family offices, so you can synthesize all the best practices, and now we have AI and stuff to accelerate that. What are some key things that you've seen in the most successful, like out of all the family offices that you've dealt with or worked with? What are the most successful ones doing?
Yeah, the most successful ones are playing offense in just one or two niches and looking to completely dominate their local area within that business or nationally or globally. And so they go into a niche or two and look to build a big moat around that and have the most IP or the most distribution. A lot of the smartest ones acquire like strategic choke points around distribution or revenue or deal flow that not only helps them in real time, but would be strategically very valuable for somebody else to acquire at some point because they'll want that strategic access that they have. A lot of them are doing things that would never make sense for someone playing a short-term game. So they're thinking medium to long-term. And some things that we do will not pay off for 5 or 10 or even more years. So not many people want to do those things, right? That's why a lot of people, don't write books. They don't know if they're going to get a payout right away, right? But it helps in so many ways. So those are some of the things I see them doing. Meeting in person is even more important now that anything can be faked over video or with AI. So at some point, meeting in person is super critical. But I think, Peter Thiel says that extreme focus is a superpower. And Elon Musk says that speed is the ultimate weapon in business. And I think those are things I see as well, right? Like the ultra wealthy didn't become ultra wealthy by doing 20 things and building up their income streams in 20 different areas. They typically spike something way up in one or two areas. And if it's two areas that they're likely very related, So they look at things like a chessboard and like, hey, this business unit is going to help this division or this other company. And our bottleneck is X. So if we go acquire or start a business doing X, now instead of a high cost, it's a profit center, or we get to cherry pick the best deals, etc. So that's like a just kind of a ravel off bullet point list of some of the things that we see, often.
Yeah, that last point was pretty cool. It sounds like they're almost thinking from like the theory of constraints, and like rather than looking at an investment opportunity as like a separate vehicle, and in a lot of cases they're looking as like a strategic acquisition to add or solve, some bottleneck that's in the current business, like the core business.
Yeah, for any investor listening to this or anyone running like a PE platform or real estate platform, I think one of the most powerful things you can do related to deal flow is that if you can position yourself with the right name, the right one-liner, the right reputation, etc., so that people know you would add strategic value to a certain type of deal, well, then people want to show you deals first. You might be able to see deals exclusively because you just take down the whole deal before someone else sees it. And you're going to be able to see deals at a better valuation. And if you see deals first exclusively and at a better valuation, then you've won the deal flow game, because now you're not looking at the leftovers that somebody else discarded as a horrible deal. You're looking at a deal that's off market. You're looking at something that maybe, like in one med spa deal we did, we needed to raise the money in 5 or 6 weeks. So we went to someone who ran 5 profitable med spas, gave him some superior terms, and he took half the deal very quickly. And then everybody else wanted to follow because that person knew the med spa space cold. But that med spa owner, he got to see the deal first and at a better valuation because of his strategic value. Right. And so I think that is the ultimate position to get in when it comes to deal flow.
That's killer. I love how you think of stuff through the positioning and the marketing and the sales lens, because I've in a lot of the conversation I've had some where people think about that, but I'd say more so. More often than not, I haven't met a lot of guys in the space that really value just that positioning and the messaging and the different ways to get kind of like have a moat and get better deal flow and get better deals. It's a counterintuitive mindset, but it's been cool with the conversations we've had. We've been able to explain kind of like some stuff that we can do on the services side, which is separate from the podcast, but it's very similar stuff. And it's really cool to hear it come from your mouth, because you're working with a lot of these just heavy hitters,
Yeah. It seems like we speak the same language. I mean, the great news is that almost everyone's horrible at it. So you can add a lot of value pretty quickly and stand out. And, the moat that we're building is the 17 million in social media, growing that to 100 million, the 30 AI tools we're formalizing and going deeper with those. We call that investor super intelligence. And then the third area is I bought Billionaires.com. It took me 12 years to negotiate that deal. I followed up every 3 or 4 months until they finally broke down and gave it to me for money. And then I've interviewed 45 billionaires out of the 100 that I want to interview. And then we found every billionaire infographic that exists on planet Earth and put it on the website. And we've identified 246 books authored by billionaires. And I'm reading all of those. So about 125 into that. And then the final thing we did is we took 986 public talks from billionaires, transcribed all of them, combine them with my 45 billionaire interviews, and then put that in an AI tool. So you can sit down and have a cup of coffee with the collective wisdom of billionaires and just chat with them and get feedback. And it tells you what billionaire is saying what. And the reason I bring that up is that like that trifecta moat of the 100 million social media, the 30 AI tools, and the billionaires.com, just like when I started familyoffices.com 18 years ago, I'm pretty sure 18 years from now, people are still going to be interested in what are these billionaires doing. And there's going to be 12,000 of them instead of 3,000 of them due to inflation and wealth creation. And it's just like a low risk space. And like, why was I able to buy billionaires.com? That's ridiculous. Why isn't Blackstone or Goldman Sachs, or why doesn't one of these firms own it, right? They all work with billionaires, right? So to me, it's mind blowing we're even able to do this stuff. It's because of what you just said. Nobody thinks this way,
I was that was the first thing I thought when we were doing research pre-show. I saw it and I was like, he owns billionaires.com. Like, you would think like that's a crazy domain. So like, I mean, props to you for that. That's awesome. I think the next question, I know Ivan, maybe you have one, but I had one follow up to that, was just like, I mean, you've said you're 150 books into the however many books by billionaires. You've interviewed 45 billionaires. You work with family offices. You probably have one of the, I mean, when it comes to peeking behind the curtain, you've kind of peeked behind the curtain into the individual, like the billionaire. Like what are billionaires doing differently than millionaires, and how are they different? And from your perspective, across all the data sets and data points that you've been able to collect.
Yeah, there's some key things. One is they're voracious learners. They can move lightning fast. They will trust their own gut. And if people say, no, that's not how it's done, that's impossible, that's not how the industry works, they know they might be onto something, and that might be the path to create massive value. Because if you always are copying the herd, which the herd is usually right, but if you're always copying the herd, then you'll just be tracking the average and you're not going to do anything unique. So a lot of times they reject, the common model to try to do something more innovative. So they think bigger, move faster, they learn more. Mark Cuban worked at a software company in college, and he read the whole software manual, went into his first day of work, and it was like a 130-page manual. Somebody walked in, he's like, oh yeah, that's page 89. Let me show you. It's really easy. Didn't you read the manual? And every time he asked that to somebody, he found out not a single customer ever read the manual. He also found out the owner of the software company never bothered to read the manual for the software that he was selling as his business. And so Mark Cuban always says on Shark Tank, like, you don't need all the capital in the world. You don't need to own billionaires.com. Like, pick a high value niche, read the manual. Everyone's too lazy to do that. Know your stuff, suck in everything you can on your niche, and then you'll run circles around everyone else who's generally looking for shortcuts and wants the lazy way through. So like that's something I think that stands out to me.
You have no idea how much your words just excited both DJ and I.
Well, yeah, I think that, I do CrossFit every day, and I think having a work ethic, a long-term niche focus to dominate a sandbox that's highly valuable will motivate you to do things that no one else wants to do, because they don't have that focus on obtaining that valuable turf over the long term. And a lot of people don't have a focus even short term, but to hold that focus over 5, 10, or 20 years is super unique. And if you choose the right niche or sandbox, then you'll do things that make no sense to do if you're just playing a short-term game.
I think the interesting thing that, because we obviously have kind of pivoted niches and from like an internet marketing background, and it's so cool to see that the fruits of you choosing this niche and spending 18 years building towards it and using your strategic knowledge and expertise within a niche that is so uncommon to like your average internet marketer. Like I find it fascinating, and it's really encouraging to see, what you've been able to build through just, 18 years of just sheer focus and having skill sets that are complementary to these people that, obviously have all the wealth, but it's a skill set that, as we've discussed on this podcast, that not a lot of them have.
Cool. Yeah. The authority is taken, not granted. And it's like, if you're always too shy to put out any content of your own, which obviously you two are not, but like some people might need to hear that. Like, you need to start, interviewing people. That's how I started, right? I was like, I don't know everything, but let me interview 30 family offices and put that in a book on family offices. And then I don't feel weird publishing a family office book at age 27 for Wiley, because I interviewed all these family offices. And now, it gives me this perception of having a network, and then it builds things, right? It's exactly like your podcast in terms of like how quickly your network grows, right?
I'm interested in your answer to this question. If you look at PE, VC, family offices as a whole, and you were to assign a number from 0 to 10 in terms of how behind they are with these skills that you're talking about, what would that number be? 10 being they're in the literal Stone Ages, 0 being they're pretty up to speed and they don't need to be that urgent. So I guess, how urgent should they be?
Well, the interesting thing is that, like, if you're managing $1 billion plus, you can ignore all this stuff and raise a lot of money because you're so credible, and there's word of mouth and referrals. So if we narrow it down to people who are managing 0 to 50 million or 0 to 100 million, and they haven't really cracked the initial momentum yet of over 100 million, then I would say that typically the venture capital crew are a little bit less behind on the times, so they might be a 1 or 2 or 3 out of 10 just on average, maybe 2 or 3 out of 10 on average. The private equity folk are typically coming from a niche industry that's not tech, and less likely to be SaaS or something that takes product marketing. It's like they might be from the manufacturing space or auto dealerships or aerospace, whatever. So I think the private equity space is definitely more behind at maybe like 6 out of 10 or so. And then the family offices, it could be across the board, but in general, it's 8 or 9 out of 10 in terms of being behind, just because a lot of them are also sometimes trying to be private, and then they don't want their name out there. They don't know how to do the marketing without being, not being private. And so they have that extra complication, or not even knowing what direction to go in after selling their business. And they're figuring that out slow motion. And I tell them, like, hey, if you want to see deals first exclusively at a better valuation, wear your strategic value on the sleeve, call your family office strategic automotive partners if that's where you sold your asset and that's where you want to invest and see deals early. And then they're like, oh no, but we also didn't invest in real estate and we kind of like manufacturing. We're like, yeah, all that's great. You can still access all those deals, but you're never going to see any deals first unless you tell people like, hey, we are world class at this. So maybe send us this stuff before you send it to some random family office, because we can open doors at GM, or we can get you on the shelf at Costco, or we know O'Reilly Auto Parts is like best friend at barbecue every weekend, right? Like, so that's the thing that a lot of these families don't get. They hear this and they think, oh no, we have to say no to every other type of deal. Like, no, you're just telling the world, we know this stuff cold, so send us this stuff first. And then people will naturally show you all types of stuff no matter what you say. That's just the nature of the family office space.
In these interviews with all these billionaires, if you were to pick one quote that has stuck with you from these interviews, what would that quote be?
I think it would just be the word unstoppable. One of my favorite books that's written by a billionaire. I've got the top 10 most favorite books at billionaires.com /books with links to them. But Eli Broad wrote a book called Unstoppable. And I think it's just, I like that word as kind of like, instead of a quote even, just because if you study the mental models, like one of my goals is to be ultra healthy, like as healthy as a pro athlete. And I like the grit and discipline it takes to be a top pro athlete. So I've had 75 NFL, NBA players on stage as investors talking. But I think if you take ultra healthy lessons, look at the grit and discipline and health routines of pro athletes, and then you look at family offices, centimillionaires, decamillionaires, and billionaires and their mental models, they got unique results because they took unique actions. And they took unique actions because they have unique mental models. And Charles Munger says we all need to have 100 mental models that we're always upgrading, tweaking, swapping out, improving. And so if you adapt mental models from those different areas I talked about, then I think you can become unstoppable. And that kind of sums up like why I like studying these groups, is just because the mental models you gain can help you come back from things and help you adapt in a world of AI that didn't really exist 3 years ago in the way it does now, right? So I think that's kind of one of the biggest takeaways, is it all comes down to the mental models.
Definitely. And you have access to a lot of mental models, it sounds like. I know we're coming up on time here, but I had one final question. Like, what is your, you've been at this for 18 years. What's your vision in the next 10 years? What do you foresee? Do you have a big vision, or is it you're just kind of taking it as it comes? What's your vision?
Yeah, my vision is to have a top 5 investor club globally that hosts in-person events. A lot of investor clubs are online only, but Robert Cialdini has shown that even before all this fake AI stuff on video came up, you're 16 times more likely to close a deal if you meet in person. So I do see us continuing our in-person events. But the vision is to grow from 17 million to 100 million via social media. Make billionaires.com the number one collection of mental models and strategies and details on the billionaire segment, and make that, very prominent. And then to just go super deep on the AI niche. We'll work on our AI tools every single day. And I think that if we get to that next plateau of doing those 3 things, then the next path will unfold in front of us probably as we accomplish those,
Huge. Yeah. Well, if we want to be respectful of your time, I mean, we could ask you questions for literally all day. But if someone wants to learn about the investment clubs, obviously we kind of talked about the domains themselves, but if someone wants to learn more, find you, get in touch with you, has a deal for you or anything like that, where can they get in touch with you?
Well, yeah, 1,000 emails a day, like a lot of people. So, if you want to be another one coming in, you can. It's just Richard at familyoffices.com. Our main website is familyoffices.com. But if you want to cut through the clutter, my WhatsApp number and text number is just 808-600-9260. And I try to get back to people pretty quick on WhatsApp and text message and be helpful with a lot of the free resources we have. So, happy to have people reach out if they have a question or need a link to something that we mentioned on the show. I appreciate you guys having me on here.
For sure. Well, appreciate you being so open, and I'm sure some people will take you up on that WhatsApp offer. Yeah. Thank you for the time.